Mr. Tiart.
On May 4th, 2007, a tornado hit Greensburg, Kansas, and it was devastating, and a lot of things were lost, and the nation responded to that and helped those people out. Now, Greensburg is a very vibrant community being rebuilt. Before that, there was a tsunami, and the people of America reached out. Not only to give $1 billion of our own taxpayer dollars, they raised an additional $1 billion from the private sector. We reached out to people that were in need. How can we turn our backs on people in our own country who are hurting when we have a situation where they're losing their homes, they're losing their farms, they're losing their businesses, their lives are going to be changed forever? And this is not a big stretch for us. It's allowing these people to reclaim what we need, what they need to have for their subsistence. Now, if it was just because we're losing jobs and we're moving them south to some other country like Chile and Mexico, we could say, well, we can make up those jobs somewhere else, maybe with green jobs. Or if it was just that our costs were going to be a little bit higher, we can say, I can pay an extra $1 a head for iceberg lettuces. But this isn't just about costs. It's just not about jobs. This is about people's lives. And I think we ought to vote for this amendment, give them a chance to reclaim their lives, and get them growing crops once again in the Central Valley of California.
Frankly, a lot of his constituents are from my part of the world. And they moved out there because there was a water disaster in the 1930s. We look on his district kind of the way Irishmen look on Americans. We got a lot of folks out there. And they still talk back and forth with one another. I've had the
Gentleman would yield. My father was the only man in America who moved to Oklahoma during the Depression.
Yeah, and I sure
to
wish
get a
he'd have
job.
stayed. I'd done a lot better on earmarks, Mr. Chairman. But seriously, we've got 40 counties, and out of 77 that are smaller now in population than they were in 1931. This is the kind of thing that happens. I can account, and I'm not presuming to think this amendment's going to win, but the gentleman from California is simply fighting for his constituents and bringing attention to the problem. It's a real problem, and it devastates lives, and it changes what happens over generations. There ought to be some way that we can work this through and find some solution. I just hate to see 40,000 people sort of ground under procedure.
Will the gentleman yield?
I certainly yield.
What about letting Salazar work on this? Salazar has shown himself to be a moderate, a sensible individual. There's somebody I think everybody could respect. He's going to put together a group, which is what you're supposed to do under the Endangered Species Act, to review this. I mean, I think that is the better way to go than instead of doing something that's going to get this bill in trouble.
Well, again, reclaiming my time, I certainly respect my chairman, and I understand the procedural thing, but the disaster is real. Just go see. And believe me, it will change the way people live. So I hope we can look at seeing if we can do something here. Thank you.
Gentleman from California.
There's no doubt that there's economic depression going on in that valley. I mean, there's been a 20% unemployment in that area for the longest time, even before the recession that we have today. I think that the suggestion that the chairman has is an appropriate way because they know all the details, but it feels like to me, having been on the California Assembly, that there's a constant struggle between management of water and the quality of water and its use throughout the state. And maybe I'm wrong, but it just feels like that the example of the recession that's going on in that area is being used to tug at our hearts to say, this is a reason why, and we need to alleviate it by releasing more water. It's just not that way. And I understand that area, and I work on the water stuff too, and I think that we're messing with an agreement between CalFed and the state that we took years to work towards the balancing of it. And you understand it, Mr. Kilmer, I know you do. So I think that we just follow the suggestion of the chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I was with Mr. Latham when we were out there, and I will tell you that as Mr. Coles has indicated, it looks like the California or the Texas and Oklahoma Dust Bowl period out there in Central Valley. I don't disagree with my chairman, Mr. Dix, that global warming is an issue. I don't know that we're going to address it by eliminating carbon emissions this year. They got a problem right now. The one thing that I don't want to tell 40,000 unemployed people in the Central Valley that we can't take the time to do anything because we've got an August recess coming up. And we can't take the time on the floor, and this might jeopardize this bill. Get it on the floor and debate it. It's a problem. Sometimes, to some circumstances, holding your breath is an appropriate response, but to do so indefinitely requires that you be unconscious. We know there's a problem there. We know we can address it. The Endangered Species Act was not written by God. It was written by man. And if we can't make exceptions to it when it's necessary, what kind of representatives are we? We need to address it now. They've been trying to do it for several months. Have the courage to stand up and vote for this amendment and get it on the floor and get it done and address the problem that exists in the Central Valley that we all know exists.
I would also like to see us have the knowledge to address this problem.
You have a
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I spent most of my career on water issues. I think I know a little bit about it. And I can tell you, studying this problem right now, my friend Mr. Dix, is not the answer, because by the time the study's done, there isn't going to be an agricultural industry in the Central Valley. We got 500,000 acres not in cultivation. People cannot make their loan payments on the land they have. Foreclosure rates are skyrocketing, not just the housing problem. The housing went for $400,000 in Fresno, now selling for less than $100,000 because people are moving out. The entire area is just as Mr. Cole described, just like Oklahoma during the Great Depression. We can do something about it right now. We can turn these pumps on and help these people. That's all I'd have to say, Mr. Chairman.
Those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
Noes appear to have it. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Adderholt. Mr. Adderholt, aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, aye. Mr. Berry. Mr. Berry, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Bonner. Mr. Bonner, aye. Mr. Boyd. Mr. Boyd, no. Mr. Calvert. Mr. Calvert, aye. Mr. Carter. Mr. Carter, aye. Mr. Chandler. Mr. Chandler, no. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Crenshaw. Mr. Crenshaw, aye. Mr. Culberson. Mr. Culberson, aye. Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis, no. Ms. DeLauro. Ms. DeLauro, no. Mr. Dix. Mr. Dix, no. Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, aye. Mrs. Emerson. Mrs. Emerson, aye. Mr. Farr. Mr. Farr, no. Mr. Fatah. Mr. Fatah, no. Mr. Frelinghuysen. Mr. Frelinghuysen, aye. Ms. Granger. Ms. Granger, aye. Mr. Hinchy. Mr. Hinchy, no. Mr. Honda.
No.
Mr. Honda, no. Mr. Israel. Mr. Israel, no. Mr. Jackson. Ms. Capter. Ms. Capter, no. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy, no. Ms. Kilpatrick. Ms. Kilpatrick, no. Mr. Kingston. Mr. Kingston, aye. Mr. Kirk. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Latham. Mr. Latham, aye. Mr. LaTourette. Mr. LaTourette, aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee, no. Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, aye. Mrs. Lowy. Ms. McCollum. Ms. McCollum, no. Mr. Mollahan. Mr. Mollahan, no. Mr. Moran. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Murtha. Mr. Murtha, no. Mr. Obie.
No.
Mr. Obie, no. Mr. Olver. Mr. Olver, no. Mr. Pastor. Mr. Pastor, no. Mr. Price. Mr. Price, no. Mr. Reberg. Mr. Reberg, aye. Mr. Rodriguez. Mr. Rodriguez, no. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rothman. Mr. Rothman, no. Mr. Roybal Allard. Mr. Roybal Allard, no. Mr. Rupesberger.
Aye.
Mr. Rupesberger, aye. Mr. Ryan. Mr. Ryan, no. Mr. Salazar. Mr. Salazar, aye. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Serrano.
No.
Mr. Serrano, no. Mr. Simpson. Mr. Simpson, aye. Mr. T. Hart.
Aye.
Mr. T. Hart, aye. Mr. Viscoski. Mr. Viscoski, no. Mr. Wamp. Mr. Wamp, aye. Ms. Washburn Schultz. Ms. Washburn Schultz, no. Mr. Wolf. Mr. Wolf, aye. Mr. Young. Aye. Mr. Young, aye.
On this amendment, 25 ayes, or yeas, 33 nays. The amendment is not adopted.